sir. Mom said hi.
We have this technique in therapy called decatastrophizing.
Okay.
And like an affirmation will tell you to speak the opposite of what you are. My brain tells me I'm not good enough, I am good enough. Sometimes lean into it. That can be scary sometimes. So if you keep hearing your mind say, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm not good enough, start writing down all the reasons why you think that's true. Everything that you wrote down, right? You said it. You carried all that stuff into the situation and you still got there.
Yes.
So even if you're not good enough, in your not good enoughness, you still got there.
Yeah, I love that.
You did.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes you realize that all of these inadequacies, they don't even matter. Like, I was still able to achieve this. I was still able to be this, even feeling not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So why I'm putting so much weight on it then?
I love that.
My name is Deborah Dalton. I am work here at St. Paul Baptist Church as the executive assistant to the senior pastor, but I'm also an established poet. I go under the name of D2 Poetry, written 3 books, just recently published a book called Koheleth, My Teacher, Koheleth, My Muse. And it is a study of Ecclesiastes where I write poems following and tracking the entire book.
Oh, that's nice.
I know it's interesting being in front. Mhm.
That was primarily we can apply those words and his kind of things he wrote about to those who use words every day to speak life, to encourage, to build up, and to construct something better for the world. So when we use this title, his book title, Finally Comes the Poet, we're using it for the purposes of speaking to the issues that young adults in our communities are currently encountering, and we want to be empowered. We want you to be empowered. I lost my place, y'all. But we want you to be empowered for the transformative work that God wants you to do in the world. When we talk about poetry in the Black community, we are talking about words that have been used to raise attention to injustice, to oppose unjust systems and structures and practices, and words that have been used to tell you that you are somebody. Right? We are discussing the effect that words have had on our emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual health. We are discussing how people have used words to inspire pride in what it means to be Black in these yet to be United States of America. But ultimately, we are discussing how people have used words to affirm that you are important, significant, meaningful, and brilliant. So today, we're not going to talk about poetry abstractly, but we want to talk about the effects that poetry has had on people in the past and the effect that poetry has on us today. Ultimately, words are important. How people have used words are significant for helping us to understand and make meaning of life. So with this in mind, we are talking about this topic not only to honor the profound contributions of people of color, to the profound contributions that people of color have had on the arts, but how the arts speak to what it means to be a loved, cherished, and important human being in a time like this. So are y'all ready for this impactful discussion on tonight?
Now we are. Okay.
Yeah,
And the reason why I'm saying that is because as a person who's usually behind the scenes, I realized that the audio was not on at the beginning part of the discussion, but the audio is on now. So me and Reverend Dia have to introduce ourselves.
It's all good. We'll do it whenever we share. It's all good. We can just jump right into it.
Well, okay. So we're talking about poetry
Yeah.
and the effects that poetry have had. Ultimately, when we talk about this topic, right, we want you to know that you are empowered. We have two brilliant guests on us, guests who are poets who's with us tonight. And what's going to happen is I want them to share at least one of their pieces, and we're going to have some discussion around this, right? So we're going to start over here with Ms. Deb.
You would start with me over here. Okay. All right. So share pieces. D, are you ready first? I'm gonna let you go first.
I don't mind. If you need to get, whatever you got.
Well, no, I can pull something up real quick. I'm gonna pull something up from my second book, Becoming Aware.
So where can we find that book at?
Becoming Aware, you can purchase that directly from me.
Okay, so
this is one that's been self-published.
Okay, if y'all want a great book on poetry, a book filled full of poems, you can definitely contact Ms. Deb directly, and she'll get you straight with making sure you have that. So, Ms. Deb, it's on you.
All right, and this poem is what I call an act of resistance when it comes to being an African American woman, because so often, especially when this was written, we weren't heard or seen in the way that our full being. So this poem is titled "I Am."
I am a beautiful woman, internally, externally, eternally. My beauty originates from the amoeba whose growth was initiated, stimulated, chemically activated from some supreme being. So you must understand, my creation is not a mistake. I am a beautiful African American woman. Well, what is so special about a Black woman? Well, allow me to expound. By virtue of the fact that we exist necessitates our importance. Our individual characteristics make us special, but it is our Blackness that makes our specialness all the more beautiful. I am a beautiful and loving African American woman. It is my love that personifies my utter beauty. My love transcends all unconditionally. You can't get any better than that. My love stops babies from crying, keeps men in wars from dying, keeps scientists trying, birds flying. There's nothing greater than my love except that of my God, and she wouldn't have it any other way. I am a beautiful, loving, and proud African American woman. My pride, not my vanity, is my self assurance. My reward in a job well done. Cool shade trees, vibrant flowers, children with laughter from children are all demonstrations of my chest stuck out with pride. I am a beautiful, loving, and proud and strong African American woman. I have the strength to move mountains, to change the path of streams. I have the strength to rebuild nations, eradicate racism, hedonism, povertyism, homelessism, every ism. I have the strength also to say, I love you. I am sorry, and I was wrong. I have the strength to live, laugh, cry, and die. I am a beautiful, loving, and proud African American woman, forever breathing, forever growing, forever surviving, forever alive.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. We're going to snap to that.
I am.
We're gonna snap
I
to
am.
that. So let's have some conversation before we move to you, Dr. Dia, and your poem. So what inspired you to write this piece?
What inspired me to write this piece? Well, some of my mentors by distance are Intisake Shanghai, Maya Angelou, when I was like in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
And matter of fact, one of the first choreo poems that I saw was for Color Girls. I had to be like 10 or 11 years old. And my father sat me down in front of PBS to watch for Color Girls. And I was just awestruck and how totally whole these women were expressing their emotions and who they were.
Mm.
And it was this poem comes from a desire to feel seen and know and let folks know that we are important. We are essential. We're a part of every fabric of this country that exists, of any country of this world. And it is a celebration of that. It is my love letter to Black women.
Mm. Wow. No, that's absolutely nice. That was a brilliant piece. And I think you can definitely see your message that you're trying to get across, that you are somebody, you are important. You are a imperative piece in this world, right? You have things to offer and to contribute. You have a right to exist.
Yes,
and
just the right to be.
That's
the right to existence be. And and when you talk about poetry as being resistance, it's showing you have a right to exist and expressing that.
Well, thank you for that, Ms.
You're
That was an amazing poem. If y'all haven't already, get that book from her, because you can see more poems or read about it in that book. What's the name of your book one more time?
Becoming Aware.
Becoming Aware. So contact Ms. Deb for that book. Let's move to you, Dr. Dia. What piece would you like to share with us on tonight?
I wasn't sure initially. I have a collection of work that I've tried to retire multiple times. You know, the poems that resonate in your spirit, or they're occasion poems. You write them for the moment that we're living in. But the piece I'll share, it was a piece I started working on doing the uprisings here in Charlotte after the killing of Keith Lamont Scott. Yeah, and I keep thinking, I'm going to retire this poem. And then another tragic accident happens. I'm going to retire it again. And something else tragic happens. And now what's making me think about it more currently is Charlotte is building Cop City. I don't know how many individuals have talked about this, but on the Central Piedmont Central campus, not too far from where we are, They're building this training facility, and I'm concerned about what does that training really look like?
Yeah.
Is it training in the sense of embracing the humanity of all of God's children? Or is it training that, leads to more oppressive regimes, trying to place people in a box?
Right.
Wow.
So no, I'll recite a piece from that body of work, and it's morphed over time. My collection of works are, my first chapbook that came out was titled Sacred Spaces. I wrote that during the pandemic. About 50% of that book was written here at St. Paul. Church was shut down. Most places were shut down. So I would come here. Brother Elson Baldwin would let me in the old sanctuary. I would sit there and write poetry. So that was the first collection of books. So about 50% of it written here at St. Paul. The other percent was written in places that I consider to be non-traditional sacred spaces. Coffee shops, independent bookstores, skate parks. And then the second book that came out earlier this year called Nightshade is a long form poem that deals with me using nightshade, similar to what Macbeth did. It's published by Theurgical Studies Press. No, Nightshade is published by Bottle Cap Press. Sacred Spaces published by Theurgical Studies Press. But Nightshade was this long poetic metaphor on how can something so deadly be so sweet. I'm often giving reference to love and how we have weaponized love in a lot of different ways. And then I'm working on 2 collections now that I'm editing, but I'll share that later. But the piece I'm reading is called My Pain Speaks to Me. My pain speaks to me like voices in an insane asylum, like voices in an insane asylum, like voices in an insane asylum, or a little child's imaginary friend. It reminds me that I'm real and that I'm still currently human. My pain has this interesting way of reaching deep into my spirit and uprooting the venom of strife like wind does to old weeds corrupting a beautiful garden. And then again, it has a way of tormenting me with the memories of my past, projecting my life story before my eyes, as if it's a Paramount feature film, and I'm the only Negro in the audience wearing 3D glasses. And then again, it has a way of thrilling me by injecting adrenaline in my veins, pumping life in and out of my heart. Oh yes, our pain does that sometimes. I feel the pain piercing like light does tonight, never becoming polluted, always infinite. I'm abducted from my body and taken away to feel the pain of ages. From Vietnam to Watts riots, from Hurricane Katrina to the war in Iraq, from Ibrahim Adebisi to Keith Lamont Scott. So as I sit here, sharing poetic words about love, pain, and forgiveness, how can I clearly say that I'm a human being experiencing spirituality, or that I'm a spirit experiencing these awful flesh tombs we consider bodies? What is Christ-like love, pain, and forgiveness? For some, it is a numbness, a nothingness, a standstillness. For others, it's like being a bubble trapped inside of an ice cube. You're simply waiting for time to melt it away. Or better yet, it's like being trapped in quicksand. Once you're in it, you're in it. So why struggle or why fight? Because the more you struggle, the more you fight, the deeper some critic pushes you into the abyss. God's love, God's pain, God's forgiveness is like that of an hourglass. And all I know for sure is that as the body of Christ, we keep flipping that hourglass. Because God's love keeps pouring. God's pain keeps pouring. God's forgiveness keeps pouring. That's all I can clearly say to myself. And all I can clearly say to others. Must Jesus bear the cross alone? And all the world go free. No, there's a cross for everyone. And there's a cross for me.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes,
wow.
I know. I always enjoy listening to Dia.
Yeah. I feel like both
the
of these
heart,
pieces, right, you have to sit with, right? Because they deeply resonate with something that we in the African American community deal with every single day, whether it's struggling with the right to exist, this perpetual pain that we keep seeing that's occurring in the world. And even the problem of, people like becoming desensitized, right, to pain, because it's a daily reality. You're just seeing something on the news, something in your community, dealing with pain. But you did a marvelous job of reading your work. So first off, where can we get that at?
Well, individuals can find me here at church, or they can look up Bottle Cap Press, and that's where they can find that work at. I have 2 bodies of work that'll come out later this year. This is going to be absurd. I know it's going to be absurd. It's going to sound absurd. So like church family, just buckle up. But I have 2 bodies of work that'll come out this year. One is called Cocktails with Jesus.
Excellent.
So I had this this ideal of what would it be like to share libations with Jesus,
Yeah.
and how that would modify or morph the last 7 words. So all the epigraphs in that body of work are based off the last 7 words.
Wow.
So some of it is satirical, but I want to be mindful in the work that I'm not bastardizing, the sacredness of the work. And then the one that I'm editing that body of work. I'm complete with it. I'm just editing it. And the body of work I'm currently writing is called Post-Colonial Trap House Theologians.
Oh, wow.
And that was a little more sensitive or hard to talk about at this point right now. But it has been my way of trying to share with my church family more of who I am beyond the veil, before the degrees, like more of giving truth and transparency to the communities that I come out of. I'm giving truth and transparency to the communities I'm currently in, and truth and transparency to the communities that I hope to contribute to at some point.
Got it.
So I'm doing this poetic exegetical analysis of myself, where I've selected 4 biblical characters to write from their lens, but analyzing me. So I'm writing from the lens of Jonah. I've certainly ran from God on numerous occasions. And in some ways, I'm still running. I'm writing from the lens of Lazarus. I hope and I pray for each of us that we have multiple resurrections. So I'm using Lazarus for that. I'm writing from the perspective of Job, the boldness to ask God to come down and prove God's self. I know I'm not the only one to say, God, make it make sense. Why is this going on?
Yes.
And then the last one, I'm writing from the lens of Judas.
Wow.
And thinking about, I have certainly betrayed God, and in the process betrayed myself. And I would dare say, betrayed my community, at times, unintentionally or intentionally.
Wow.
So those are the 2 body of works I'm currently working on.
So you can have each one of those be a discussion in and of itself.
Yeah. I would love to hear that Judas.
Yeah. Because we want to talk about the celebrations and how we model the positive side, but we don't ever want to talk about how we betray Christ on a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean,
one way or the other.
Judas gets such a bad rap. There's no St. Judas Baptist Church.
Oh, no.
Child named Judas.
No.
But yeah, I would be very curious to hear that poem about Judas. I think that'd be a great one. All of them sound great, but that Judas one, man, you really piqued my interest, and it's so fitting for this time. So you all have just read your work. I want you all to kind of talk about how you found your way to doing poetry, and the reason why we're going to talk about that is because currently a lot of young adults are having struggles finding what their purpose is. They don't necessarily know what God may be intending them to do. They don't know where they want to go in life. A lot of them feel like they're working this job aimlessly for just money or just to make do what it do, right? But they don't necessarily see what they're doing as their purpose. So how did you find your way to doing this? How did you sense that this is your purpose, that this is something you should be doing? Let's discuss that.
There's 2 ways for me to look at that. We've got the discovery of my poetic voice, and then me answering the calling to work on this last book that I dealt with. Okay, my poetic voice came from a place of dealing with trauma that I didn't even understand was trauma at the time. Experiencing trauma at the age maybe 9, I think it was like 7 or 8 or 9 in that era. And it took to maybe my late 40s to really process it and even recognize what I was going through was trauma. But finding a way to speak to the emotions that were so bottled up inside of me. Where do I find a way to get rid of that? And express sometimes the pain, the ugliness, and in watching how other poets navigated that space gave me the tools to speak. Growing up with my father giving me books from the Harlem Renaissance, reading about Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Alice Childress, going through their books and learning how they creatively talked about the world around them. The stories that we talk about, Uncle Remus stories, where you take animals and express what's going on and using that to, you finding creative ways to speak. So that's what brought me to my voice. Being called into ministry. I remember answering my call after a long time of running, as you mentioned earlier. And I always had this scripture that spoke to me and it made zero sense. It was Ecclesiastes. And it was the phrase, meaningless, meaningless. Yeah. Everything is meaningless. And I'm sitting here in the Bible reading. I'm like, what in the world does the thought about meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless have to do with the Bible and God? So I said, I'm going to go through this and study this book and get it. Okay. So not only did I study the book, I decided to start writing poetry pieces about it. First, I took every chapter and then I went through every pericope. And what I got from the book of Ecclesiastes when it comes to purpose and defining who we are, so often we want to define who we are based on our jobs, based on what we earn, based on how we look, who we're married to, and what, when really the purpose of who we are is connected to our relationship with Jesus Christ. So getting to that humble space of really understanding where your purpose is, everything else becomes ancillary at that point. It doesn't matter what job or function you deal with. Am I doing something that I find joy? Am I able to serve the way Christ asked me to serve? So it's as you navigate through that, and a lot of that book, and that's this book right here, Koheleth, it actually has each pericope shown, and then you actually have a biblical study with it. I processed my trauma. I processed the grief of losing my mother. I processed the joy of having stepchildren. I processed my joy of the Black church. But all of those things as you process, and you have to ask yourself what is truly important. And Ecclesiastes tells you all of this is meaningless. Yeah. But what is important is how we define ourselves when it comes to Christ and God and worshiping and sharing and serving him. So yes, we want to talk about the jobs. Yes, we want to have a nice house and clothes. Trust me, I want to have a nice house and clothes too, but that is not my purpose. And aligning that in the right way does it for you.
I like that. I like you picked up on something that I really like. You talk about poetry as this form of therapy for you, right? It's this thing of healing that led to embracing the journey for you. And I think that's a vital part of what poetry does, right? Yeah. It's a form of healing for us, engaging in it. Yeah. So thank you for sharing about that journey. I'm pretty sure some young adults who's watching feel that it was definitely helpful what you shared. So Dr. Dia, what perspective do you have, right? What led you to it? How did you find purpose here, right? Or
now I'm still linking on with Sister Deb. I have a question for you. Ask it. Do you think your parents at the time realized, the magnitude of what they were pouring into you?
That's a great question. Because and I rewind back to not really understanding who my parents were as a child. I didn't know my parents were civil rights activists as a child. They didn't frame it as that. But they, coming from that activist background, poured into me purposefully. They would sit there and tell us I am beautiful, I am strong, those conversations. So I know they were intentional. I didn't understand the depth of who they were in the process. And as I grew up, I did. So it was less about what they did into me, is about me recognizing what they were doing for me and the legacy they provided for me and their actions as young adults in college, protesting and being arrested at that time.
I asked that because your response to your question, your response to the question is very much indicative and in alignment with mine for me.
There's something about that.
There's something special about that. I would say my parents were doing what I consider now radical parenting. At the time, I didn't really consider that. And they did some things that I think were unconventional for their Blackness and for the church, specifically. But the first poet that really spoke to my spirit, or the first poet I had my hands on his work, was Shel Silverstein. He wrote the children's poetry book, Light in the Attic, Where the Sidewalk Ends, several books like that with whimsical drawings. And I remember looking at the back of the book, and he was this bald poet. And I was thinking, this is one of the coolest Black men, got to be on the planet. And then I found out years later that he wasn't Black.
Yeah.
In just the context of me growing up thinking that Romare Bearden was a white man and Shel Silverstein was a Black man, and then find out later on that it was quite the opposite of that. But I also grew up in a graffiti culture. I was a tagger for quite some time. I'm at a very young age. And when I was, getting consequences for it at school, as opposed to my mom giving me what I was calling then a royal flogging, You know how it goes down, like, as opposed to her doing that, she did this radical parenting where she lined my bedroom walls with these long strips of paper. And she said, this is your canvas.
Wow.
So every 4 to 5 months, we would change it out. I would fill out the entire wall with word art, doing mind maps and bubbles of everything on the wall. We did this probably up until me being around 11 or 12. Rolled them up. I still have some of them. There are 2 that are now a part of the permanent collection at the Mint Museum Uptown.
Oh, wow.
So these are drawings that I did as a kid that were poetry. But the radical part of that parenting was she also, and both of I have 3 sets of grandparents, my maternal, paternal, and then my step. And the 3 sets are pastors. But particularly one of my grandparents was a poet as well. So he was a theologian and poet. I sound like him. We look a lot alike. He died when I was very young. Well, my mom comes to my bedroom one day and she says, you no longer have to go to church. I may be 12 or 13. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. My prayers have been answered.
Wow.
Because we church. Church is long. So she comes and says, you no longer have to go to church. So I'm staying at home. And for the first couple of weeks, I'm going through my dad's, vinyl collection, Earth, Wind and Fire, Parliament Funkadelic, Frankie Beverly and Maze. I'm going through my dad's VHS collection of blaxploitation films.
Wow.
Cleopatra Jones, Foxy Brown, Shaft in Africa, Shaft, The Big Score, the list goes on, and Superfly. And there was something in that moment and I was reading a lot of poetry too at the time. My dad had a notorious poetry collection, and reading a lot of comic books. And the very values, and I would say the morals that my parents wanted me to gain at church, they were definitely on my spirit. But I started to see those very things pop up in these blaxploitation films, this funk music, this poetry. And I just got to the point eventually as an adult, I said, if God can speak through a burning bush, God can certainly speak, through Shaft in Africa.
Yeah.
Can certainly speak through the greatest hits of Stevie Wonder, Roberta Flack, whoever it is. And I just started listening to it a little differently. There was a major shift that happened. I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing now.
That's why I'm laughing when you said you were free from church.
I
Now
was
look
free.
at you, Reverend Dr. Dia.
I never thought it. And part of the dream I was sharing with Eric, part of the dream was always to be a professor. However, I never thought it would be a theology professor.
Gotcha.
And I certainly didn't think I would be using poetry as one of the primary means of conveying God's grace and mercy for the universe. But when it's on your spirit, it's on your spirit.
Yeah.
I don't think you can escape it. Dr. Scott said this phrase that's been lingering with me, and I've been trying to find a way to write it poetically. This has been months ago. He said something along the lines of, I'm over people saying I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious.
Yeah.
And like I find spaces. I was on a train. I was in California on a bus, and a gentleman saw me I had Dick Gregory Bible Tales with me, and they happened to be reading it. They said, "Oh, you're one of those people. Where are you from?" And I was like, North Carolina. It's like, oh, you're really one of those people. You're from the South. So you're really into the church. And he's like, well, I'm not into it. I'm spiritual. I'm not religious. So I was like, I'm going to play this out somehow. I'm going to hit him with something. And before I got off the bus, I turned to him and said, God is good. And without thinking about it, he instantly responds. We know how it goes.
Yeah, all the time.
So I say that to say when a poem, a hymn, or scripture is so deep on your spirit, you can't get it out the marrow. It is just there. And my parents had gotten that the nature of the church was so on my spirit that when I was looking at these things that they consider secular, I was able to identify the sacredness that was in it.
Yes.
Wow.
Finding the sacred and the secular.
Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, thank you all for sharing your stories. Kind of staying around this theme of purpose. I feel like we also have to have a discussion on kind of removing self-imposed boundaries, right? Limits that we place on us, because what you are doing is vulnerable, right? It's nerve-wracking to share your word, to stand on the stage and to speak, to write and have people to read it. So how has writing poetry and then doing spoken word have also helped you to kind of stop standing in your own way so that you can reach your full potential?
Okay, first you're assuming that I have stopped standing in my own way. Okay, all right. But stand less in my way. Stand less in my way. Okay. I have been an actress. I grew up as an actress in elementary school, high school, and college. And putting on a role as an actress, you actually embody somebody different. So if you're able to fully embody that particular role, you don't feel so self-conscious. The braveness of it when it comes to doing a poem and then willing to speak about it, you almost have to process it enough to be able to share it. So that also when you share it, you don't re-traumatize yourself. And there's some artists, I remember sharing with a collective of artists here in Charlotte, and the young men, and I applaud them for it, most of them were engaged in therapy because they wanted to make sure they didn't re-traumatize themselves. And the advice that I gave to them, I asked them, have you ever done acting? I said, what you got to do at that time so you don't re-traumatize yourself, if you haven't processed it for yourself, is to put on that beingness of who you were and then throw it off like a loose sheet. As Pastor shared, sometimes you don't hold it. Yeah. So how do you get past it? The fact that you understand that you speak to that irreducible essence of whatever it is that you have in your space, and you have brave enough to then just capture it in a piece of paper, tells yourself you have the courage to express who you are. It is like your superpower of beingness. And it may just be that one part of who you are, but the fact that you're able to write it down shows that you have courage. And then the first time you're able to share it with somebody, it increases your courage. So you're constantly building and growing to do it. I'm not sure if I fully answered it, but my thought is you keep doing it and being it because it is you. Yeah. Even when you're commissioned to write pieces about some abstract thing, you always have to bring a piece of yourself to it to do it. Yeah. To be authentic and sincere. Let me put it that way, because I've seen some poetry where you know it's not authentic and sincere because they brought nothing to the table for it. It may sound pretty and cute, but you don't feel the soul of that person in it.
No, I think what you said is good. I mean, because I can relate as far as with sermon and Bible study. You kind of build up the repetition of doing it, and your confidence does increase, right? Yeah. You kind of slowly work your way through, working your way through standing in your own way. And that's not to say that you won't ever get past it, right? You just kind of start to do it less. You do it less. But the more you do it, the more you engage in the work, you do build up a confidence and kind of self-assuredness of like, you know what? I can do this, right? I've done it in the past, and I can do it again tomorrow if I got to do it. So, no, thank you for that. I think young adults would definitely appreciate that. And those who aren't young adults who definitely struggle with self-esteem and self-confidence, right? I'm thank you, Ms. Dell, for that.
One more note, too. I'm learning. I'm in this season of my life. I'm in my late 50s. And I finally get to the point where I feel a fear about something. Instead of shrinking into that fear, I do it anyway. Okay. Showing how it represents. Writing my book. I said, I got this wonderful, my mother passed away in the middle of me writing my book. And I had the blessed opportunity to connect with so many of her dear friends as I was telling them that she passed. One of my mother's friends from college was Jeremiah Wright. Wow. So he tagged me together with one of my mother's roommates, and me and my sister had some great conversations speaking with my mother's roommate in college. Okay. She was sharing story after story. So I'm writing the book, and I'm like, it would be nice if I can get Jeremiah Wright to write my foreword for my book. And I'm like, no, that's too much. And I asked, he agreed, he read it, and he wrote a foreword to my book that just blew me away. So I'm learning to, whenever I feel that fear, I'm now seeing that as a cue of something great that can happen in my life, that if I don't push through it, it will never happen. Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's a basketball term, but you miss 100% of the shots. You don't make. Yes, exactly. Right. Absolutely. But just go out there and do it, right? Because you never know how things will work out. And if you don't do it right, you could be preventing yourself from something magnificent that God is trying to do in the moment. Yeah. So it's kind of it's nerve-wracking. It's scary to just jump out there. Sometimes you have to, and then let God catch you if you fall. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Thank you for that. That's good. But your mother was friends with Jeremiah, right? Yeah. Actually, not only that, my father was a suite mate in college. Yeah. That's major right there. Yeah. That's major. Yeah, you got a prophetic call on you. So, Dr. Dia, how about you, man?
That's a great, and thank you for that answer. Yeah. That's a great question. it's a constant struggle. I don't think there is a one-stop shop answer for it. And I agree with Sister Dalton. I think you just have to step out there boldly and do it. But I think one of the parts for me is having a affirming community and the sense of what it means to step out. There's one thing for me to tell myself that. It's another thing for me even to start comparing myself to the, the comparison trap of social media or whatever it is. But it's another to have a community that appreciates you or values you enough to not just pray for you, but to pick up and say, hey, you got a gift. What are you really doing with it? But also to find that those portals in other people's embodied and lived experiences as well. Those that are tangible to my life, but also those who I may only have the experience with by, communing with the ancestors or whatever it may be. That's been one of the journeys for me, but it's an ongoing one because I definitely stand in my own way. But I believe in the trinity of receiving messages. And there's something about when you get that message multiple times, God's not making a mistake here. Sometimes I'll say things like, God, you got to show up with, 2 forms of government ID before I do that. And before the day is over, God has shown up in some form, maybe not with a government ID or, but has shown up in magnitude in a way that I can't deny. I can't deny it all. But that's a question I'll be lingering on for a while.
Thank you. I like it. So community is important, right? People to affirm, to build up, to support, to be here for you.
And I'll add to that. The community is important for me because I want to be specific when I say this. I'm talking about St. Paul.
Okay.
I'm not talking about every community.
Yeah.
I'd rather be embarrassed with my family. Than me be out there in them streets and I'm sharing something, be it poetry or the gospel. And then, I'm out there not only because I'm not only ambassador of God's grace and love, but I want to be an ambassador of this space, this sacred space. So if I step out there,
we represent.
We represent in a way. And that's something for Black and brown communities. It's a burden to bear, but it's one that I embrace.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, here in St. Paul, we have a great supportive community, man.
We really do.
Such loving and hospitable people.
So much so. I mean, I speak on it often how it is such a pleasure and joy to come to work first with people that I love and who love me, but then to serve people that I love to serve as well, because, just wonderful, great people, to serve them in whatever capacity, because I love loving on them and I love receiving the love from them. And we just keep and grow and just make this thing do what it do here at St. Paul Baptist Church.
I respond to that too. That is a part that poetically, I think, should be elevated. The type of community we have here, and you're talking about the boldness of sharing poetry. I think this place supports that in a profound way. I'll give you 2 examples. For me, in losing my mom, I lost my mom recent, and there's something about hearing Sister Dalton or others talk about what that process was for them. And then it gives me the invitation and the boldness to be more emphatic about what I'm feeling inside. I'm struggling here. There's something special about that. I had Dr. Scott reach out to me after my mom had transitioned, and he says, no one can tell you how to grieve or what your grieving should look like. And in my mind, no one had said otherwise, but in my mind, I had generated that type of feeling. So those are the kind of things, I'm pretty transparent about this, in the journey of my partner, my wife and I, trying to conceive. It was a journey. We had lost children along the way. And for some reason in my head, I was like, well, that's her body. That's not necessarily my journey. And then someone in the church, I had mentioned it one Sunday in the pulpit, and someone in the church came up to me, a brother, and said, you lost a child too.
Yes.
And then I found in that boldness in me being able to share that, and then started poetically sharing the number specifically of Black men that had been hoarding that pain.
Wow.
They don't feel like they have the right to.
They don't feel like, so there's something special about that. And I think I have experienced that when I take the time to really think about it. I have consistently experienced that at St. Paul from day one. Someone sharing through their testimony then becomes a portal for me to be transparent with mine and share with them. And thus, I'm not only gaining a better understanding of who I am as a child of God, but I'm getting a better understanding of who we are as a community.
Yeah. It allows us to connect with one another.
Yes.
That brings us together.
Yes.
I like that. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Dia. That's amazing. So I feel like at this point, we need to define what is poetry.
Okay.
You look it up on the internet. Is different definitions of what poetry is. So what do you define as poetry?
You mentioned something about boundaries, going beyond boundaries and being free. I recognize poetry to me as any free expression of whatever I write that follows the rhythm and rhyme of my heart at the time. We can get so trapped into the traditional poetry moments, having the iambic pentameter, the da 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 da, and we miss what's speaking to the heart. So it escapes the typical boundaries of prose, writing dissertations or writing novels. Is however creatively you want to express. It could be in how you have the words in one letter going all the way down. It could be having something look like a cross. It's words placed in artistic form to speaking about the matters of your heart. That's how I define poetry.
I like that. I think the biggest thing that you helped out, right, when you typically think about poetry, you think about this book, right?
Yeah.
But Deb actually helped. She said, well, what's your favorite song, right? And we, in the CAYA planning meeting, we just kind of went and listed our favorite song. And it's like, well, that's poetry.
Yeah.
You said your sermon writing is poetry, right? Reggie, who's a lawyer, arguing a court case, that's poetry, right?
Yes.
You're using words that's coming from your heart to move somebody else's heart, hopefully for positive impact, right?
Yes, hopefully.
Because words hurt.
Yeah.
But I think that's so freeing to help us to understand that poetry is all around us each and every day. When we sing those hymns on Sunday morning, right, on the first Sunday of the month, and we're singing spirituals, and the hymn choir singing a meter hymns, and George Dunlap get up and stretch that out. That's poetry, y'all. Yeah. And we're embodying it. We're all, as we stand up as a congregation, we're embodying poetry. So when you kind of explained that was also freeing for us, because it helps us understand, wow, poetry is literally embedded in our everyday life. We just don't necessarily see it as such.
I mean, think about it. The rappers of our time are the modern day poets that exist. Now, we may not appreciate the content they share in all the ways, but some have extremely deep thought and profound words. Common, you've got, Kendrick Lamar, you've got so many out there that do, and you're like, oh my God, did he just really lay that out there? And poetry, and I just thought about poetry in motion when you talk about certain basketball players. It's just whatever moves your heart and spirit. It could be visual, written, and it could actually be spoken. Because sometimes it's not poetry that you're going to remember. Because when you'll go to and do rapid fire discussions with people and writing poems together, you can write it, never have it written, and you're just coming off the cup. But it doesn't, because it's not memorialized in the paper, does not make it any less poetry.
No, thank you for that.
Some of my best words were stuff that I didn't get a chance to write down. And you're like, oh my God, where's the paper? And you're like, oh, well, I done lost that. That would have been great if I wrote it down.
But I think that's part of the answer, though. Like, poetry is an invitation for us to be present. I'm not going to remember every moment. I'm not going to remember every phrase or word. What poetry causes, I say to myself sometimes, poetry, is an invitation for me, one, to slow down. I don't think the Black Baptist Church do any of these things I'm about to say well right here. One, to slow down. I think poetry causes for that, particularly if I'm trying to comprehend what's taking place. I think it's an invitation for me to be present. That if I can just sit in that moment, that I don't have to, manufacture everything. There is something about just being present. And I think it's an invitation to breathe. I have to ask myself sometimes, have I really taken time to breathe today? And poetry is an invitation for that. But answering your question specifically, my mind, I tell you, my brain instantly went to, like, when I think about the embodiment and the walking example of poetry, in the tangible sense at the time, I think about Dr. Drummond. I had this moment with him, and he was just sharing words with me. And I was trying, and I should have been present with him, not knowing we were going to lose him. And I just kept thinking, every word he said right now could be the start of a poem. And it was some absurd words. And it was like
rather interesting in the conversation.
And there was this one particular one where he had said, now I know now that he had said, yeah, Lord. But what I kept hearing him say was, yeah, dog. And I was like, wow. And I was in my head, I was like, I can't wait to get home to write that down. And he had his cufflinks on. It was just like his swagger. and the nature of who he was, whether he was hitting cars in the parking lot or whether he was like giving an amen from the pulpit. He represented that for me. You know, he was an embodiment of the poetry. Another way to answer your question for me is, I had a professor, someone I greatly admire and love, Major Jackson, who's also the host for a podcast called The Poetry Slowdown, which I highly recommend. It's a short podcast, and I'll share some resources and links, but it's like a 5-minute podcast. He reads a poem, and then he's out. He doesn't even try to analyze it, just giving you something fruitful for your spirit. But he said to me one day in a class, he said, poetry is the tongue of God. And the words were beautiful at the time. And I was like, I really have to sit with that. And not that I disagreed with him, I don't. But I wanted to know, what is the application of that? What does that really mean? And I've since come to this notion of saying, well, if God is the poet, then Jesus is the poem, and the Holy Spirit is my encounter with the word made flesh.
Wow.
You know, so my journey on this life, at least, is to have a better understanding of that poem. And the poem is Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, so if Jesus is the ambassador of what I should be looking towards as my model and my mentor text of how I should operate, I no longer want to just be consumed with just writing poetry. I want to be poetry.
Wow.
So poetry is the tongue of God.
Wow.
I think that is our journey. Like, how can we be poetry?
Jesus.
How can we be?
And I've had an encounter with that. I had mentioned my grandfather, who was a theologian and poet. His name is Elder L.T. Ford, no longer with me. And a couple of years ago, from an aunt who had passed away, I inherited this suitcase of 8 tracks. You may be too young to know what 8 tracks is.
Oh my God, Eric, no.
But I inherited these 8 tracks. And this last year of my life, I received this major grant. And I assumed I knew it was on the 8-track, but I was able to get some of them transcribed to digital files.
Oh,
so
great.
on those files is my grandfather giving sermons and reading his poetry.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And I'm listening to it, and this for the first time, like maybe 6 to 8 months ago. And I'm listening to it, and I'm hearing my own voice for the first time. So now what I'm working on, goes back to your question, what is poetry? I'm working on a sound installation where someone enters the art gallery. They hear my grandfather reading a poem, and his last words are my first words starting the next poem. Wow. And if I time it out just right and craft it just right, my last words then become his first words, and you keep hearing the piece go around and round. So I say poetry is also a way for me to commune with God and commune with the ancestors.
Wow.
And whatever that looks like for individuals. And I'm not talking about people say, well, I can conjure the spirits. I'm talking about in ways that are fitting for our Christian experience.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that I'm having that encounter now.
Wow.
Wow. That's awesome. Wow.
I'm going to take away that so that your life can be poetry.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Our embodied experiences. And we look for that in each other. We just don't always realize it. If we go to a space, Eric, you and I together, and it's a crowd of individuals, one of the first things we're going to do, if we find another Black man, we're going to give that poetic, universal black head, that is poetry. Yeah. When my spirit is not feeling good and I get that from a Black man on the streets or one of the elders in our community say, baby, it's going to be okay. That is the poetry.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's all you can just say.
That heart to heart speak.
Yeah.
Yes. That heart to heart speak. Wow.
Wow. No, thank you for that, Dr. Dia. I'm looking at the comments. I'm just going to kind of lift what a couple of people have said. Evelyn Hollis has said, this is an awesome dialogue, even as an older elder, I am then younger individual. You have provided so much food for thought. Yes, y'all definitely have provided so much food for thought. And then Leslie Gaynor pointed in the chat, poetry as the tongue of God.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like there's been so many great one-liners in this.
I mean, that's part of being a poet, you know what I'm saying?
Wow.
The careful crafting of words. Yes.
I have a question. Who was the sister that said, even as an elder, who was that there?
That was Evelyn Hollis. She says, I'm an older than younger individual.
Oh,
that's what she says. She says an older than younger individual.
I'm gonna eliminate that word older at some point. I'm getting there. I'm eliminating it. Wise, I would say.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking the reason I asked who it was, I want to throw this challenge out to her to write a poem or to poetically respond. When I hear that thought or that question, one of the things that lingers with me is, when was the first time Evelyn experienced seeing her own embodiment in media? When I am at a point where I'm trying to figure out how to write, I don't, when I'm in quote unquote writer's block, I do believe there are ways to get out of it. So my challenge to her would be, what was the first time you saw yourself represented beyond the walls of your own home?
Yeah.
I asked a sister that not too long ago, and I am going to mess up the name, but I think she said something like Gloria, the TV show where the woman of color was a nurse, I think.
Yeah.
I didn't fully understand the show, so I went home and we could,
Diane Carroll,
go to Google and Google everything. But I think when we talk about poetry and embodiment and representation like that for Black and brown individuals, that is a gateway to the poetics for me. I think I can't help but think about, George Jefferson. When I think about where did my poetics come from?
Gotcha.
His bantering with, his sister-in-law. Even the phrase he would use, "you beady-eyed fool."
Yeah.
I can't help but think about, I said George Jefferson. That was Sanford and Son right there.
Okay.
I was thinking about Sanford and Son.
It was George Jefferson. And what was the, Lord, she's still living too. Florence.
Yes, that's
George and Florence.
George and
Florence, and with the neighbor.
Yes, but like the two of them, like Sanford and Son and George Jefferson, they're the poetics that are in there, the nature of who we are, the bantering that we do with each other is poetics. Like, I'm going to mess with you, but I ain't going to let nobody else mess with you.
Well, I mean, it was also part of our code speak back in the day. It was a way for us to share information and not appear threatening to others as well. Our code speak in our songs, talking about the Underground Railroad passages that had clues hidden in the songs and the poems. And it was a way to express and have fun and get joy, but also share something that only we could understand.
Yeah. No, thank y'all so much.
Evelyn said she's accepting that challenge.
Yeah, accept the challenge, Evelyn. Listen, we all need to accept that challenge right there. So y'all, time has went by absolutely great.
Wow.
This has been a great discussion. So we only have time for one more thing. I want to lift this one last thing up. This has to do with kind of self-discovery, self-expression. So in his commencement address to Spelman College in 1980, Howard Thurman, Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman. First, for you all who do not know, he was first dean of Andrew Rankin Chapel at Howard University, first Black dean at Boston University, renowned theologian, but also had a significant impact on the civil rights movement for our leaders such as Martin Luther King, Wyatt T. Walker, Bayard Rustin. He was the mentor and the spiritual guide for all of them. But here's what he said in his commencement address. This is 1 year before his death. Nobody like you have ever been born, and no one like you will ever be born again. You are the only one. And if you miss the sound of the genuine in you, you will be a cripple for the rest of your life. How does the sound of the genuine come through to you? The sound of the genuine is flowing through you. Don't be deceived and thrown off by all the noises that are a part even of your dreams, your ambitions, so that you don't hear the sound of the genuine in you, because that is the only true guide that you will ever have. And if you do not have that, you don't have a thing. So right, he's talking about the sound of the genuine, finding the true you, who you are. What does it mean to unapologetically walk in your authentic self? And how has poetry helped you to do this?
What does it mean to authentically be Deborah Lynn Dalton? What it means for me is to live without having the considerations of others in my head when I make decisions, and checking into myself and find out what I really want and what I really need. And it evolves in time. So authentically, it means to sound out the noise of others and listen to what God and me have going on, not what this magazine and something tells me what's going on, not what other women my age are telling me what's going on. What is it about that God has shared with me to be authentically me in the process? And it's simple, but it's complicated to hear past the noise.
Yeah.
Because that noise can be very loud sometimes.
Comparison is a monster.
Yeah.
And people's opinions and expectations of you are a monster. But just focus on what God has to say, and who God is creating you to be. So thank you for that. Dr. Dia?
That's a heavy question. That's a big one. I'm still discovering in many ways what that means, but I would say impulsively now, to be my most authentic self is to embrace and accept my pain, my fear, my shame, to embrace those things in a way knowing that they tether me to others. That my pain, I'm not the only one experiencing that degree of pain. Who am I to think that? Who am I even to think that God needs to go out of God's way to give me some punishment or consequence? That my fear is just that. And if I serve a God that can do anything but fail, why am I walking around hoarding fear?
Yeah.
Or proclaiming the gospel, and then I'm walking out the door, feeling the same way I did when I walked in. And then my shame, that is just that. It is it's done. The price has already been paid. So I think to be my most authentic self is to know that those things can be portals for others to understand me and for me to understand others, and they can be the things that tether us together as well. I received this in the conversation. I will be thinking and praying this evening that Sister Dalton and I continue to find ways to honor and celebrate our parents.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how we are tethered now together because of the experience of losing loved ones, but also gaining our other loved ones with the extension of this community. What does that mean? So I have to think about that question a little more, brother.
And you become a part of a quote club that nobody knows unless you're in it. That you experience. It's a club whose membership, nobody wants to have the price of membership to get into it, but we know that we are the only ones to get it in our own unique ways too.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing. I hope from this discussion, you all have found a sense of reassurance in the beauty of who God has caused you to be and created you to be, that you all feel a sense of self-assuredness that you are worthy and important and valuable, that you're cherished, right? This is what we talked about here on today. But we're all on this journey called life, right? Poetry situates itself in the human experience of life. People tell their stories through poetry. We connect with them because that's our story too. And just sharing it like you all just did, you all connect because you share similar stories. And that's the beauty about words and creativity and art. And we just hope that what you've got out of this on today is that you embrace the genuine you, that you find reassurance that you're not on this thing called life by yourself, but you have a community of people around you who truly do love you and value you and want to see you become who God is calling you to be. So as we're preparing to leave here, one final thing, what tangible resources would you all recommend for us to buy? What would be some people you need to look at? Podcasts? Help us out.
Yeah, I'll reference two podcasts that I listen to frequently. One is called, I already mentioned The Slowdown. I love it. One is mentioned The Slowdown by Major Jackson. The other one is a podcast called Poetry Unbound. And a collection and other references, I would say, go and listen to Marvin Gaye 1976 album, What's Going On? The poetics of that. You definitely can hear his theology in that work. And I would say, rest in peace and power. Roberta Flack's work. I'm listening to a lot of currently the greatest hits of Roberta Flack because of the transition of her life. So going back and listen to I would say, someone mentioned earlier, that's my daddy's music.
Yeah.
So I said, go back and listen to your daddy's music.
Yeah, listen to your daddy's music. Your mama's music. Yes.
The kind of stuff that we would have done then is the very thing that I think can bring healing to our spirits now.
I agree. No, thank you for that. I'm glad I was raised in an old soul household. You start naming artists, I'm like, I know who that is.
Okay, I'm gonna leave you alone, Eric.
I don't know who some people are, but the ones Dr. Dia mentioned, I know who they are. So Deborah has a library over here. So
yes, my big thing is if you want to engage in poetry, the one thing you want to do is read other poets. Listen to other people's voices. just to hear and see it. And you can find yourself, like you said, you find yourself in other people's poems. So just read, pick up a book and read any poet, every poet, and reconcile yourself to the fact that there's no such thing as a good or bad poet, just a poet that speaks to you. So I just pulled up a short list of books. In my bedroom, I have like a stack that big of poets that I know and I experience. And if you have a book of poetry, I buy it because I love to read everybody's poetry. But the top two are the ones that my parents surrounded me of when I was growing up. And it was a compilation put together by Langston Hughes, where he put together a list of Black poets and prose writers. Get into those and read those. Amanda Gorman, Gwendolyn Brooks, Bell Hooks, any and everybody. Just pick up a poetry book and read it. And then if you want to write, just write every day. It doesn't have to be good. Just write. Yeah. Write something. Yeah.
And if you don't feel comfortable writing, we all have a cell phone.
Yeah.
Just voice it. Just speak into it.
I'm
just
big
start
on voice to text nowadays.
Yeah, same for me. Just voiced it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you so much for your presence here today. I'm pretty sure we're all grateful and thankful for how you have come in and share so much wisdom and knowledge. I pray that our viewers feel, like, again, reassured in who you are and see the profound impact of what poetry has had in the past, but also has right now, right? We're embedded in it. It's all around us. So fam, thank you for joining in. We look forward to seeing you the last Wednesday of May. We'll come back with another great topic. But until then, you be good, and we will see you then.